The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Parents let their kids play outside until the streetlights flickered on, and the biggest worry was who'd win the annual pie-eating contest. But all of that changed when the children started disappearing. It began one chilly autumn evening. 10-year-old Mia was playing in her front yard, her giggles echoing as she tossed a ball for her dog, Max. Her mother glanced out the window every few minutes while preparing dinner, confident Mia was safe. But when she called Mia to come inside, only Max came to the door, his leash dragging behind him. Panic spread quickly through the neighborhood as the search for Mia began. Police combed the woods, neighbors knocked on every door, and her picture was plastered on every telephone pole. But days turned into weeks, and Mia was never found. Life in Willow Creek grew quieter after that. Parents kept their kids indoors, but the fear didn't stop the disappearances. 2 more children vanished over the next month, both under eerily similar circumstances. Each time, the only clue was a small toy left behind, a plastic soldier, a raggedy teddy bear. By now, rumors were swirling. Some said it was the work of a drifter, others whispered about something supernatural in the woods. But 12-year-old Daniel, curious and brave to a fault, decided he'd uncover the truth himself. One Saturday, Daniel convinced his best friend Jake to join him. "We'll just check out the woods for a bit," he said, holding up a flashlight. "What's the worst that could happen?" Jake hesitated but eventually agreed. The boys told their parents they'd be playing in the backyard and slipped into the woods. The forest was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that made every rustle of leaves sound deafening. The boys walked deeper, their flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. After a while, they found something strange, a small clearing with an old rusty camper sitting in the center. The camper looked abandoned, its windows covered in grime, and its door hung slightly ajar. Jake wanted to leave, but Daniel was determined. "What if this is where the kids were taken?" he whispered. They crept closer, their breath visible in the cold air. As they neared the camper, they noticed something on the ground, a trail of small toys leading inside. Daniel picked one up, a doll with its head twisted backward. His hands trembled as he dropped it. "Let's go," Jake whispered, but Daniel shook his head. The boys stepped into the camper, the air inside thick and stale. The walls were lined with old faded wallpaper, and the floor creaked under their feet. In the corner, they saw a collection of toys, stuffed animals, trucks, and dolls, all arranged in neat rows. Daniel's flashlight flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. Then they heard it, a faint sound, like muffled crying, coming from behind a door at the back of the camper. Jake grabbed Daniel's arm. "We need to leave, now." But Daniel moved toward the door, his heart pounding. He gripped the handle and slowly pushed it open. The room was small, with only a dim, dangling bulb for light. In the corner sat a little girl, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. It was Mia. "Mia!" Daniel whispered, rushing to her. She didn't speak, only shook her head violently and pointed behind them. A low creak came from the front of the camper. The boys froze. Footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate, growing louder. Jake grabbed Mia's hand, and the 3 of them darted out of the room, Daniel's flashlight bobbing wildly. As they reached the front door, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with sunken eyes and a twisted grin. "Leaving so soon?" the man drawled, his voice as cold as the autumn air. The boys didn't stop. They shoved past him, Mia in tow, and sprinted into the woods. Behind them, the man's heavy footsteps thundered, accompanied by a sinister, wheezing laugh. The forest seemed endless, the trees blending together in the dark. Mia stumbled, but Jake hoisted her up, yelling, "Keep going!" Finally, the lights of the neighborhood came into view. They burst out of the woods, screaming for help. Porch lights flicked on, and neighbors poured into the street. The man didn't follow them out of the woods, but his laughter echoed in their ears long after they were safe. The police were called, and Mia was reunited with her family. She was too traumatized to speak much, but her story matched what the boys had seen: the camper, the toys, and the man. When the police searched the woods, the camper was gone, as if it had never been there. But deep in the forest, they found a shallow grave containing the remains of other children who hadn't been as lucky as Mia. Willow Creek never went back to normal after that. Families moved away, and the woods became a place no one dared to enter. As for Daniel and Jake, they never forgot the man's twisted grin or the sound of his laughter. And sometimes late at night, Daniel would swear he heard footsteps outside his window, followed by the faint rattle of a toy soldier falling to the ground. In the quiet town of Millstone, life was simple and peaceful. Parents let their kids roam freely, trusting their neighbors and the safety of their streets. But that sense of security shattered when children began disappearing without a trace. It started with Emily, a sweet 7-year-old who loved to ride her pink bike around the block. One afternoon, she waved to her mom and pedaled off, promising to be back before dinner. She never returned. Then it was Lucas, a shy 10-year-old who loved to read at the park. He left with his favorite book under his arm and vanished into thin air. The town was gripped with fear. Parents kept their kids indoors, but the disappearances didn't stop. The police were desperate. They interviewed everyone, combed the woods, and even brought in search dogs, but nothing turned up. It was as if the children had been swallowed by the earth. Among the worried parents was Anna, a single mother of 9-year-old Ben. Anna was fiercely protective, never letting Ben out of her sight. But one evening while she was unloading groceries, Ben disappeared from their backyard. Anna's heart shattered. She begged the police to find her son, and they promised they would. But as the days dragged on, hope began to fade. One night, Anna was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when she remembered something strange. A few weeks ago, she'd noticed a man in their neighborhood. He drove an old, beat-up van and often parked near the playground, watching the kids. At the time, she'd brushed it off as paranoia, but now the memory made her skin crawl. Anna reported the van to the police. The description matched a man named Richard Cole, a recluse who lived on the outskirts of town. He had no criminal record but was known for being odd, always keeping to himself and rarely seen outside his house. The police decided to investigate. Early one morning, they arrived at Richard's home, a dilapidated house with boarded-up windows and an overgrown yard. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Something about the place felt wrong. The officers circled the property and noticed a basement window slightly ajar. The faint sound of music drifted from inside, a haunting lullaby that made their blood run cold. With a warrant in hand, they forced the door open. The smell hit them first, a sickly sweet odor that made their stomachs churn. The house was a mess, filled with piles of junk, old newspapers, and strange drawings taped to the walls. But it was the basement that revealed the true horror. As they descended the creaky wooden stairs, the officers' flashlights illuminated the damp, dark space. In the corner, they found a makeshift cage made of rusted metal bars. Inside were 3 children, pale and trembling: Emily, Lucas, and Ben. The children were alive but terrified, their clothes dirty and their faces streaked with tears. When the officers opened the cage, the kids clung to them, sobbing. "Where's the man?" one of the officers asked. "He left," whispered Lucas, "but he said he'd be back soon." The officers searched the house, their guns drawn. Upstairs, they found a room filled with disturbing evidence: photos of the missing children, toys arranged in a grotesque display, and a notebook filled with ramblings about keeping them safe forever. Then they heard it, a van pulling into the driveway. Richard was back. The officers hid, their hearts pounding as the front door creaked open. Richard stepped inside, humming the same eerie lullaby. He carried a bag filled with candy and small toys, clearly meant for his captives. Before he could reach the basement, the officers emerged. "Police! Don't move!" Richard froze, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, he looked like he might run, but he was no match for the officers. They tackled him to the ground, handcuffing him as he screamed incoherently about how the children belonged to him. The news of Richard's arrest spread quickly through Millstone. Parents wept with relief as their children were returned home, but the town would never be the same. Richard confessed to everything, revealing that he had planned to take more children. He showed no remorse, his twisted mind convinced he was saving them from the outside world. His house was torn down shortly after, but the scars he left behind remained. Children like Ben struggled with nightmares, and parents became overly protective. never letting their kids out of their sight again. Years later, Anna still remembered the look on Richard's face when he was caught, a twisted mix of rage and fear. She'd often wake up in the middle of the night, hearing the faint echo of that haunting lullaby. But she'd remind herself that the monster was behind bars and her son was safe for now. It was a quiet afternoon when 12-year-old Emily sat on the couch in her living room, scrolling through her Facebook account. She wasn't expecting much, just some messages from her friends and the usual updates. But today, something was different. A message popped up from a person she didn't recognize. His profile picture was of a man in his late 30s, smiling in a way that made her feel uneasy. "Hey Emily, I see you like the same music as me," the message said. "I'm a big fan too. You seem cool. How about we meet up?" Emily stared at the screen. She had never talked to this man before. His message was strange, but he seemed friendly enough. She didn't reply at first. Then the man sent another message, this time saying, "I live just down the street, about a 5-minute walk. We could hang out if you want." Her heart started to race. She thought about it for a moment. She had heard warnings about people online, but this man seemed so casual, so familiar. Maybe he just wanted a friend, but something in her gut told her not to trust him. Still, her curiosity got the best of her, and she replied, "Where do you live?" The man quickly responded, "I live at 32 Oak Lane. Just follow the road behind the park, and you'll see my house on the right. I promise I'm not a weirdo, just bored and looking for someone to talk to." Emily hesitated. She knew she shouldn't, but the thought of having someone to talk to was tempting. Her friends were all busy, and her parents weren't home yet. Then, just as she was about to type a response, something made her pause. She glanced out the window and saw a figure standing at the edge of the street, watching her house. She squinted but couldn't see their face clearly. It looked like the man in the profile picture. Her stomach dropped. She quickly closed her laptop and ran to her mom's room to check if she had left her phone behind. She picked up her mom's phone and called her best friend Chloe. "Chloe, I need you to check something for me," Emily said, voice shaking. "I think the guy I've been talking to is near my house. Can you look up 32 Oak Lane?" "Hold on, I'll check it for you," Chloe said. A few seconds later, she came back on the line. "Emily, you need to get out of there. 32 Oak Lane is a creepy house. It's abandoned. People say it's haunted. No one lives there." Emily felt her blood run cold. She stared at the screen of her mom's phone as Chloe continued, "You need to tell your parents. Now." Her hands were trembling as she looked back toward the window. The figure was still there, standing motionless. Then, to her horror, it started walking toward the house. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She was trapped. She had to think fast. Without hesitation, she bolted out the back door, running into the woods behind her house. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't let this man find her. She ran and ran, the sound of her footsteps echoing in her ears. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her mom. "Emily, where are you? I just got a call from the police. They're on their way to the house right now," her mom said, panic clear in her voice. Emily stopped in her tracks, out of breath, and explained everything. The man, the messages, his strange insistence on meeting up. Her mom quickly told her to stay hidden and not to go back home until the police arrived. Minutes later, sirens blared through the neighborhood, and Emily watched from the woods as police cars pulled up to her house. Officers quickly surrounded the property. They searched the yard, the driveway, and even the alley behind the house. When they finally found the man, he was standing in the backyard, just feet away from where Emily had been. He was arrested, and the officers later told Emily's family that he was a convicted child predator, using fake online profiles to lure children into dangerous situations. The man's true identity had been hidden by his fake profile, but the police had already been tracking him for months. He tried to meet up with several other children before, but Emily had been the one to help them catch him before it was too late. As the police led him away in handcuffs, Emily could still hear the words he'd sent her, but they no longer felt harmless. She knew she would never forget that day. The day a stranger almost tricked her into trusting him. The day she had narrowly escaped becoming a victim. Emily never logged into Facebook without checking her privacy settings again, and from that day on, she never spoke to strangers online. It was a lesson she'd never forget.